Alright, YouTube, a second grade teacher in Texas has abolished the concept of homework and naturally is being applauded by all of the students lucky enough to have this teacher. They will probably note that their educational attainment over time does not decrease as the result of this. In fact, it's likely to increase. Homework is useless. It's a useless relic of a past age where we believed that simply ramming more material into somebody's brain made them smarter. That's not the way that intelligence works. You will attain much greater results if you spend the first few years of school, like kindergarten and first grade, teaching critical thinking and the basics of arithmetic, reading and writing and so forth. Reading and writing is easier, potentially. It's more objective and solid mathematics. Everything else, it's a little bit different. Teach people to think critically, and you don't have a need to buff up their intelligence so much in any other respect. They will generally outthink their peers if they've been taught in that manner. Now, some people learn it on their own. The sort of cosmic rebel minority within your schools. The problem children have a tendency to be problem children because they've thought critically about the basic structure of the educational system and authority in general. They've come to the conclusion that it's all a bunch of hocus pocus. It's all subjective, it's worthless, it's not benefiting them, it's arbitrary. Nobody has an explanation of why these systems work the way they do, and because nobody can explain it, it's considered inadequate junk material. And that's true. Homework is junk. It shouldn't be used at all. I also think that we should have recess in high schools. I don't think it should cut off at 6th or 8th grade. I think there should be recess for high schoolers too. You'd see their educational attainment skyrocket, because their minds wouldn't get so burnt out through the day. Give them also a longer lunch so that they don't have to scarf down the cardboard pizza that Michelle Obama's giving them. I can remember cardboard pizza when I was in elementary school, but it looks down, but in retrospect, seems like I probably got a regular golden treat eating that stuff as compared with the shit that people have to go through now under the federal lunch programs that they've got in operation currently. I also think that we shouldn't even have a Department of Education because it's obviously useless. Our educational attainment continues to slide backwards. We were the #1 educator in the world. We were #1 in all of these areas decades and decades ago, back in the so-called Dark Ages, when the federal government meddled very little in education. We were #1 in everything. All of a sudden now we're falling down through the list year by year with no sign of recovery. Half of Europe is better. Parts of East Asia are better. It's bad. The situation is not good. It's not good for the world's largest economy to suffer such a glut in education, to the point where a lot of PhD candidates are foreign-born. They're not even from the United States. That's because we don't teach critical thinking. We don't teach the objective source of the basics and the subjective source of all other materials. We instead have strangely inverted this so that we consider, we talk about how, oh yeah, the slang terms, that's just fine in your grammar. We're not going to grade for that. But if you don't absorb this completely subjective theoretical theory from the Marxist school, then we're going to penalize you from that. I mean, it's retarded. We're working in reverse as far as trying to build a good educational system. We're piling on more homework. We're talking about longer school days. That will be the opposite of a good solution. Shorten the school days. Be easier. Let them read on their own. Let them learn on their own. One of the biggest problems I think we have in the American educational system, we give students so little time, free time, between the school they go to and the homework they do thereafter, that they learn that reading is a chore, it's negative, and they shouldn't do it. And then they've already burned themselves out reading what the government has chosen that they should read. So they don't spend any time reading something that's more entertaining, increasing their vocabulary, increasing their literary potential. That's why we don't have as many great authors now as we did maybe 100 years ago. We don't have as many great mathematicians. We don't have as many great physicists or biologists. What we end up having are a lot of mediocre people who have gone to college, and again, they just spend an extra 2 to 4 years learning this mumbo-jumbo, most of which is theory presented as fact and fact presented as subjective theory in a weird form of inversion. Meanwhile, all the PhDs and master's degree students are coming from foreign shores. It's like the master's student that was heading the general chemistry lab that I went to at UVM. He's from India. Wasn't from the United States. He was from India. And there were a lot of others that fit into this general category, from India, from China, Japan, places like that. They come here, they get a good education because they've been taught the right way. They've either been taught in an extremely rigorous manner, like the Asian countries tend to do, or they've been taught in the, here's critical thinking for you, now we're going to give you more free time, turn you loose, and you should do a lot of this on your own. Here's sort of the rough guidelines of how to study, and it should be fun, it should be entertaining, and build you up as a person mentally, like some of the European countries do. Either of these models would be better than what we're using now, as evidenced by the fact of our educational attainment rankings. Homework is vestigial. It doesn't do anything. You put somebody in school 6, 7, 8 hours later, they get out, they're totally burnt out from what they've been doing in school. They're not paying attention to their homework. They're not paying attention to it at all. Now, I'll use myself as an example, and others I've witnessed. I didn't have a problem with homework. I did it in school. I would fly through the work that I was supposed to be doing in a class, and then the last like 10-15 minutes, I'd do a little bit of the homework in the class. I got most of the rest done at lunchtime, to the point where my study halls where I sat there for 45 minutes, depending on the block scheduling, and goofed off on the internet for that period of time. I never did homework in my study halls either, or only very rarely. You know, I have like 2 problems left that I didn't get done at lunch. That's what I did. I came home, I played video games for hours. I spent hours every night reading, usually like Harry Potter and Elfenship and stuff like that. Why do you think my vocabulary got larger? Because I didn't have to worry about homework. I had hours every day to do what I wanted to do, much of which was educational in nature. Most of it was educational. If I was gaming at the time anyway, half the time I was playing like Age of Empires, Oregon Trail, something like that, something that's like edutainment, which honestly, some of those games, way better than like modern gaming anyway. I still have half of those on my computer. I got SimCity 3000. I've got the Oregon Trail too. I've got Empire Earth and some of this stuff, because they're fun, honestly. And I play RuneScape. Not quite so educational there, I suppose. No, our school system is clearly not working. If it were working, if more government was the answer, then as we added additional layers of federal regulation, you would have expected our educational attainment ranking to begin climbing back up. Instead, it's continuing to fall. If more hours at school and more homework was going to work, you wouldn't expect it to be falling at all because it's remained stable for so many years. The fact is our educational system is falling apart. There are a few states where the state takes supremacy, has designed its systems to be more adequate than the federal government's own guidelines, like here in Vermont, like over in New Hampshire, across the Connecticut River, Minnesota, certainly. Some of these other states are doing fairly well. They're on par with many of these European states that outrank the United States as an aggregate total significantly. And what all these states seem to have in common, they don't run their schools like prisons. There aren't, bars on the windows and metal detectors everywhere, and people aren't given, like, truly strict dress codes and expect to show up like a bunch of prison inmates. They're not, necessarily the police state states. They're rural areas mostly. And that's what they have in common. That and the fact that they have a high educational budget, which I think itself doesn't explain the discrepancy, because then there are states with relatively high educational spending that don't get those results. I think that what they have in common is the small town feel of their schools. The schools here don't look like prisons. The schools here look like schools. I think it's a little bit different. I saw what schools looked like down in southern Texas, and I'm not surprised that students didn't want to go and learn things there. Because between the tall chain link fences topped with barbed wire, in a few cases around these schools, and the fact that they were like, horribly lit with the fluorescent lights, and they had like that weird prison-ish smell. For senior law, we had to visit a prison. The smell is about the same as some of the high schools I've seen in this country. I'm not surprised that people felt like they were in a personal prison. Giving them homework so that they suffer when they go home isn't going to help the situation. The school system itself needs to be reformed. Get the federal government out of it, let the states handle it. Number 2, don't think that money can solve everything. It helps to spend enough to provide an adequate education. Beyond that, you're just throwing money at the problem for no reason. Number 3, teach critical thinking, especially in their younger years. They're like a child is like a sponge, especially in the first 4 or 5 grades. Second graders, third graders, you should be teaching them the classics. You should literally be teaching them Plato. Read them, have them read the Republic. They're capable of doing it. If you've taught them critical thinking and you've instilled in them a desire to learn, and you don't beat it out of them, you're going to get better results. asking them to sit on their ass all day and learn things they don't really give a damn about, half of which is a bunch of bullshit anyway, that's history written by the victors, or the political theory written by Marxists, or science written by, you know, well, let's teach them about Linnaeus and stuff like that. Oh, yeah, we're going to teach them some of these Malthusian theory as though it still holds sway and relevance in light of more recent developments in this world. We're going to try to compact this all into their head while keeping them sitting on their ass all day, which is probably the most antithetical thing you could have to a small child. They should be up and about. They should be moving around. You ask why we have public health crisis, obesity crisis. The great irony, the so-called reform of school lunch programs in this country, which is a pork program led by Michelle Obama and hasn't done anything. That great program is sort of a microcosm of the amusement of this whole situation. See, the obesity crisis in part among children is the result of them sitting on their ass in school all day and then having to sit on their ass during the rest of daylight hours in the northern hemisphere doing homework when they get home half the time. And yet here you have another attempted band-aid on a gaping wound from the federal government in the form of, oh, well, they'll eat healthier lunch, which they're not. They're eating less healthily than they were even before. It should be repealed. It should be done away with. There shouldn't be any federal involvement in education beyond a standardized disbursement for schools that are obviously incapable of supporting themselves in an area where it is absolutely necessary to do so. And I don't have a problem, by the way, with private schools. The concept of private schooling, people have asked me about homeschooling as well. Homeschooling, yeah, well, it depends on how they're being homeschooled. If they've been taught critical thinking and they're reading and doing the math, I have no problem with that. I don't necessarily think it's a great idea to let some religious zealot teach their child at home to, you know, just read one book for the rest of their life, which is going to be the Bible or the Quran or something. Most of the time, though, that's not what happens. You get parents that are survivalists or whatever. They don't trust the public educational system. They can't pay for private education. Public education's ruined, which it honestly is. I don't really blame them for taking the initiative to do that. In private schools, they do tend to be better. They're better because of, again, they've adapted systems that aren't, you know, like the American public educational system. I went through the public education system. Now I'm doing fine. But that's because of my innate rebellion. That's because I sort of forsook the concept of standard learning and, in many cases, taught myself a lot of things. I was reading on my own anyway. They never managed to beat, obviously, from the nature of my work, my love for books out of me. They tried, though, you know, having me read The Gay Gatsby I think it was 3 or 4 times throughout school. Had to read it in middle school, then I had to read it in 9th grade, then I had to read it again in 11th grade. It's like, how many times do I have to read this depressing piece of shit so-called classic work that's not a classic at all? It's just a piece of crap. Or The Sound and the Fury, or something like that. Oh my God, the worst book ever written, and these English teachers treat it like it's some invaluable, worth its weight in gold classic. No, it's not. It's boring as hell. It's completely and utterly boring, and I hated reading it. The only reason I think I got like 100 on the analysis I did of it, the essay, was because I was bullshitting my way through. I didn't even pay attention to half the fucking book. It's one of the few times that I use like the crib notes thing. Honestly, because it was unpalatable to me. And Great Gatsby, yeah, I did really well analyzing that because I had already read it 2 or 3 times in middle and earlier high school. So I figured, oh, well, yeah, I already know how the book's going. It's like having people read in class. It's like, oh my God, when's this going to be over? It's just torment. Yeah, stop being boring. Give them something. The Odyssey, that's great. That's an exciting work. It's a classic work. Give them Plato. You know, it's funny. They have them. They have these people, you know, 9th grade, you know, CP English, you're reading the Odyssey, but they say, oh, Plato might be a little too advanced for them. What the hell are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. Have them read Blood Meridian. Yeah, it's full of gore and rape and stuff like that, but at the very least, it's not a boring work. Yeah, Blood Meridian was one of my favorites. Mainly because it has Satan in it. Or a character that's sort of a stand-in for Satan, I should say. But yeah, abolishing homework should be something that all schools look into. Every teacher should unilaterally decide to abolish it. It's not helping your students. It's not. They're either going to do it in school anyway, and then they'll go home and they'll succeed not because of the homework, but because of its absence once they get home, so they can decompress and learn on their own potentially. Or they're going to get bogged down with it. They're going to hate you for years. And then you get to be villainous teacher who's using an outdated methodology from, half a century ago. It's problematic, really, to do this. It's pointless. That's about all. Peace out.